These are just regular wristwatches, and the price tag $17.8 million. So why so expensive? And why do some watches cost a couple bucks, while others go for millions? Let's start with the cheapest watches, the kind you can find at any market or subway underpass, like a simple Casio for 10 bucks. Inside they've got a quartz movement. In plain English, that's a tiny battery and a little silver of quartz that keeps the time ticking accurately. This movement costs pennies to make, and they crank them out by the millions on assembly lines. Here is the funny part. These watches tell time just as well as expensive ones, actually even more accurately than a lot of them. The production cost is under $1. Everything else is just the store's markup. These are made by the Japanese company Casio, the same folks who make calculators, electronic keyboards, and other gadgets. Just watch sales alone bring Casio about $1.2 billion a year. Pretty solid for such a simple product. But inside of these cheap watches, there is almost nothing, just a battery and a piece of quartz. And then there are watches with hundreds of tiny components inside, and they run without any battery at all. So let's move on to those. Moving up a notch, we've got watches around $100 bucks. The Seiko 5, a legendary line from the Japanese company Seiko. These have been in production since 1963, and tens of millions have been sold worldwide. Inside the Seiko 5, things get interesting. It's a little marvel of engineering. Dozens of tiny parts, gears, a mainspring, and a balance wheel that oscillates back and forth, keeping time. No battery whatsoever. The watch winds itself just from the motion of your wrist. And here is a little more detail. Inside there is a mainspring called up like a spiral. When you move your wrist, a special motor spins and gradually tightens that spring. That's how the watch stores energy without any battery. And it stores a lot. Even if you take the watch off and set it down, it will keep running for about a full day until the spring unwinds. As long as you are wearing it, it keeps winding itself, so it never stops. Then the spring slowly unwinds, turning the hands through a series of gears, while the little balance wheel swings back and forth, keeping a steady rhythm so the watch stays accurate. It really is an engineering marvel. Seiko is a massive Japanese company with over a century of history, and watch sales bring in about $1 billion a year. And Seiko does it all, from the cheap quartz movement we saw in the first watches to beautiful mechanical pieces for $100 bucks. What's more, Seiko actually started a revolution. In 1969, they released the world's first quartz watch, and that's what made basic watches a whole lot cheaper worldwide. Now let's go higher. Watches around $1,000. But here is the twist. For that money, you're not actually buying a watch anymore. I'm talking about the Apple Watch, basically a tiny computer on your wrist. Inside there is no spring, no gears. Instead, there is a processor, a screen, sensors, and a battery. These watches show messages, measure your heart rate, take something like a mini ECG, track your sleep and workouts, and can even call for help. The most expensive model, the Apple Watch Ultra, costs about $800, and with a nice band, it creeps up to $1,000. The case is made of aluminium, while the pricier models use titanium, a lightweight, super strong metal. Up front, there is a protective glass. On the back, sensors press against your wrist to read your pulse. Inside and out, these aren't watches in the traditional sense. They are full-on tech devices, packed with electronics. And they sell like crazy. Apple sells about 33 million of these watches a year, more than the entire Swiss watch market combined. Apple doesn't disclose exact revenue for just the watches, but estimates put it somewhere between $14 and $18 billion a year. Just pause for a second. That's more than almost every famous watch brand makes. You would think this is where the video would end, because what could possibly beat a mini computer on your wrist? But it turns out a lot. But here comes the unexpected twist. The next watches won't cost $1,000. They will cost tens or hundreds of thousands, some even millions. But here is the catch. Inside, there is no screen, no processor, no sensors, no no electronics whatsoever, just metal and tiny little springs, basically the same old mechanical movement we already saw in the $100 Seiko. Yes, these are Rolexes. Rolex, probably the most famous watch brand in the world. The name itself has long been a synonym for wealth and success. But let's break down why. Let's start with what a Rolex is made of, and credit where it's due. They are really well made. The company produces almost everything in-house at their factories in Switzerland: the case, the bracelet, and the movement inside. The steel Rolex uses isn't ordinary. They use a special grade they call oyster steel. It's tougher than regular steel, resists scratches, and won't rust even in seawater. But it's also harder to machine. Rolex even melts its own gold at its own foundry right at the factory. And every movement is tested, so the watch runs with extreme accuracy. So you can't really find any faults here. It's honest, high-quality work. But here is the whole point. By rough estimates, all those parts and materials inside the steel Rolex cost the company only a couple $100. Rolex doesn't disclose the exact number, but the metal, the movement, and the assembly are just a tiny fraction of the price you see in the store. And in the store, even the simplest steel Rolex costs several thousand. So what are you actually paying for? Let's break it down step by step. For over 100 years, Rolex has been building its reputation as the most prestigious watch on the planet. These watches were on the wrists of the first people to summit Everest. They dove to the ocean depths in them. Presidents and movie stars wore them. Rolex drilled one simple idea into people's heads around the world: if you've got a Rolex on your wrist, you've made it. And the company pours enormous money into making sure that idea sticks. Rolex sponsors the most expensive, high-status events in the world: Wimbledon tennis, Formula One racing, golf tournaments, the Oscars. Anywhere wealth and success are on display, that crown logo pops up. Year after year, decade after decade. So in the end, you're not buying a chunk of steel with some springs inside. You're buying a symbol, a watch that tells everyone around you without saying a word that you have accomplished something. The cheapest Rolex starts at around $6,000. For example, the Oyster Perpetual. Rolex founder Hans Wilsdorf called the case Oyster because it was sealed as tightly as a shellfish, keeping water out. These were the world's first truly waterproof watches, which Rolex released back in 1926. The second word, perpetual, refers to the movement that self-winds from the motion of your wrist. Rolex invented that in 1931, and it's been in nearly all their watches ever since. Rolex deliberately makes fewer watches than people want to buy, not because they can't make more, but because scarcity is the ultimate value. When something is hard to get, people want it even more. You can see this best with their most famous model, the Daytona. In stores, the steel Daytona costs about $15,000. But you can't just walk in and buy one. They are never in stock. They'll put you on a waiting list for years. People wait years for the chance to hand over their money. And for those who don't want to wait, there is the secondary market. And there, the same Daytona sells for $30,000 or more, double the retail price. Think about that. The watch officially costs $15,000, but you can only actually buy it for $30,000. And people pay, just because there is no other way to get one. Rolex produces about 1 million watches a year. Like Apple, they don't disclose exact numbers, but estimates put their revenue around $14 billion. That makes Rolex the most powerful brand in the entire watch market. It alone accounts for nearly a third of all luxury watch sales worldwide. And now for the most unexpected part. Rolex isn't owned by a billionaire or a giant holding company. The company is owned by a charitable foundation, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, named after his founder. He had no children, and he bequeathed the entire company to this foundation. So, Rolex has no greedy shareholders demanding maximum profits, and then some of the money goes to charity. That's partly why they are so relaxed about making fewer watches than people would like to buy. They are in no rush. The most expensive Rolex ever sold, that same Daytona. It belonged to an actor and racing driver Paul Newman, and in 2017 it was sold at an auction for $17.8 million. And here is the wild part. As an object, it's just a regular steel Daytona. In fact, in the 60s, these watches sold so poorly they were offered at a discount, because nobody wanted them. But this specific one was worn by Paul Newman himself. His wife gave it to him back in 1968, when he was filming a racing movie and started competing in races himself. She was worried about him, so she had the case back engraved with "Drive carefully, me." Newman wore them every day for about 15 years, then just gave them to his daughter's boyfriend, and for decades everyone forgot about them. The watch was considered lost. That same boyfriend put them up for auction in 2017. The bidding lasted for 12 minutes. An anonymous phone bidder outbid everyone and took the watch at $17.8 million. Who it was remains a mystery. He chose to stay anonymous. Now, the most expensive watch ever sold went for $31 million. That's the Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime. Patek Philippe is a Swiss manufacturer that's been making watches since 1839, and among collectors it's considered the pinnacle of the entire watch world. And the Grandmaster Chime is the most complicated wristwatch ever made. It has 20 complications inside. That means 20 different functions beyond just telling time, and every single one is built from gears, with no microchips whatsoever. For example, a perpetual calendar. The watch knows how many days are in each month and accounts for leap years. You don't need to adjust it until the year 2100. Or a minute repeater. You press a slide, and tiny hammers chime the current time on steel gongs. This was invented back when there was no electricity at night, and you simply couldn't see the dial. There is also something no one had ever put in a watch before: an alarm that chimes at a set time, and a separate mechanism that strikes the date. And the case flips over. One side has one dial, the other side has a completely different one. All of this is assembled by a single master watchmaker, entirely by hand, and it takes years. But the most interesting part isn't even that. Normally, Patek makes these watches from gold or platinum, but this specific one was made from ordinary stainless steel. And it's the only steel example of the model ever made. That's why collectors fought so hard for it. There will never be another steel one. It was sold in Geneva in November 2019 at the Only Watch auction. And this isn't a regular auction. It was created by a man named Luc Petavino after his son was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a severe, incurable muscle disease. Every 2 years, the best watch brands donate one unique piece, and all proceeds go toward research for the disease. Petavino's son didn't live to see the auction. He passed away 3 years earlier. All the money from the sale went to charity, and the Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime made it into the Guinness World Records as the most expensive watch ever sold.